So there's a famous Steve Jobs quote that goes, "Design is not just what it looks like and feels like, design is how it works." And I think that the iPad mini is one of the best examples of this philosophy. I mean, think about it, right? On paper, you have technically one of Apple's least impressive iPads. You have this smaller screen, a less impressive display, a chip that's closer to an iPhone than a MacBook, and all for about the same price as an iPad Air, depending on how you spec it. And yet, this little thing has become one of my most used Apple devices. Not because it's the most powerful, because obviously it's not, but because it's able to show up for me in places where my iPhone, MacBook, and even my iPad Pro seem to struggle. So to understand why the Mini works and why it even exists, I think you have to stop looking at Apple's iPad lineup as these separate products and instead start seeing them as a spectrum, ranging from iPhone to MacBook. On the iPhone end, you have something that's super portable and basically has no friction, making it temptingly easy to reach for. On the MacBook end, you have something that is super powerful, but also with that comes a greater amount of friction and more commitment. So what does this mean practically? Well, it means that just like an iPhone, I'm able to reach for this with little effort and get immersed in it quickly. But unlike an iPhone, it's capable to where I can actually get work done on it. And so instead of comparing this to the other iPads, I think the better question is, what keeps me coming back to the Mini? And I think that the first and most obvious answer is so I think it's easy to throw the word portability around, right? Especially in 2026, where our devices are as small and thin as they are. Like technically, the iPad Pro can be considered portable. But I think that carrying this around still requires effort and intention. With the iPad mini, I just throw that thing in a sling bag, and it's quickly becoming something that I just take everywhere. I think that unlike an iPhone though, it doesn't feel cramped. And it's especially useful for the gaps in my day, like when I'm waiting in line or commuting. As a working engineer who sometimes does field work and sometimes sales, I can't tell you how useful it is to have this on my person, to take photos, take notes, bring up technical documents. And I think that that's the real value of its size. Okay, let's move on to reason number 2. Okay, don't mind the background. It's just starting to get dark. Okay, so low friction productivity sounds like one of those annoyingly toxic productivity phrases, but hear me out. The iPad mini is definitely not the best device for getting serious work done. Like if I'm about to write a long Word doc, or maybe do some coding or 3D modeling, I'm reaching for a laptop. But what the Mini is weirdly good at is helping me get started. And that can be the hardest part, right? Like on days where I know that I have a lot of work ahead of me and it just feels daunting to get started, the Mini feels less intimidating. I remember when I was a student, this was especially useful because inevitably I had assignments, right? And when I had the feeling of not wanting to start an assignment, I'd often reach for the Mini and I would just lay back on a couch, not feeling like I was committing to a full work session, but just read through the assignment, build an outline, and after 20 minutes of doing that, switching to a laptop felt like a much easier transition. And so I know it sounds trivial, but I would say that it's genuinely changed the way I work because it's lowered the effort I need to get started. Okay, and then the third reason that I keep coming back to the Mini, and this is something that I didn't expect to matter as much as it does, but it's that I would say it's the perception that people have of this device. Like, if I pull out my phone around other people or in a meeting, it can look like I'm distracted and not engaged. And if I'm on my laptop, that might look like I'm closed off or just siloed in my own world, right? But the Mini sits on this nice middle ground where it appears like I'm taking notes and I'm just actively engaged in the conversation. And so it's subtle and nuanced for sure, but it matters to me. So of course, this would not be a balanced video if all I did was talk positively about the iPad mini and just gas this thing up. So let's talk trade-offs. First, the display. I would say the display on the, the display. I'd say the display on this is adequate. It's not amazing, and that's mainly because of the 500 nits max brightness. For reference, this is 1/4 of the 2000 nits max brightness on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. While it's perfectly fine indoors, using it in daylight can be a bit of a strain. I know some people also had issues with the display's limited 60 Hz refresh rate and apparent jelly scrolling, but none of this has been an issue for me, and I would think it's because I don't really use the Mini for gaming. Thankfully though, all of that might not be an issue for much longer because of the rumored OLED display on the next generation iPad mini. The second thing I would love is more RAM, if only to future-proof this thing. I know that the iPad mini 7 recently got an upgrade to 8 GB of RAM, but even with that, very occasionally I find this thing starting to lag just a bit. And then the third thing is, which is less of a trade-off and more of a personal regret, but I just wish that I opted for more internal storage, at least 256 GB. You can see that I'm barely scraping by here with 128 GB. And so if you're considering the iPad mini as an everyday device, I would say the extra storage is well worth considering. So to close this video out, it's for all the reasons I've mentioned that the iPad mini is such a weird device to recommend. Because, as we've seen, on paper, it's the lowest spec iPad, it's not the most powerful, and it's not even the best value. But it still works because it fits in those moments where your phone feels too cramped and your laptop or even a bigger iPad feels like overkill. And that's the real appeal. And so if you're looking for a do-it-all iPad on a budget, you're probably better suited for an iPad Air. But if you want a device to fill the gap between your phone and your laptop, and you're looking for something for couch productivity, reading, taking notes, travel, then the iPad mini starts to make more sense.